The carriage accident that should have killed Duke Thomas Greyford instead stole something far more precious than his life. It stole his very identity. When he awakened in his grand estate with no memory of his name, his past, or the faces surrounding his bed, Thomas became a stranger in his own home. The family members who claimed to love him spoke in hushed tones about decisions that needed to be made, about estates that required managing, about a will that perhaps needed updating. Their smiles were too bright, their concern too practiced, and their eagerness to help him remember felt more like manipulation than care. In the fog of his confusion, Thomas began to suspect that the people closest to him were the very ones he should fear most. But then Miss Lucy Carter arrived, a humble lady's companion with honest brown eyes and gentle hands, hired to assist with his recovery. Unlike the relatives who spoke of his wealth and power, Lucy saw only a man struggling to find himself. She had no inheritance to claim, no title to covet, no reason to lie. In her presence, fragments of his true self began to emerge, not the cold, calculating duke his family described, but a man of principle and compassion. As Lucy patiently helped him piece together the truth of who he really was, Thomas realized that losing his memory might have been the greatest gift of his life, for it had stripped away the facades and pretenses, revealing not only the greed of those around him, but also the pure heart of the one woman who asked for nothing but offered everything. Now, with Lucy's help, he would have to decide. Would he reclaim his identity as the duke his family wanted him to be, or would he choose to become the man Lucy believed him capable of being? The battle for his memory would become a battle for his soul, and the humble lady who had helped him remember his past would ultimately help him choose his future. The first thing Thomas noticed when consciousness returned was the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of sleep, but the heavy, expectant silence of people holding their breath. Voices murmured just beyond the edge of his awareness, concerned, urgent whispers that seemed to dance around words they didn't want to speak aloud. "Doctor, surely there must be something more you can do," came a woman's voice, cultured and precise, but carrying an undertone that made Thomas's head throb. "I'm afraid not, Lady Greyford," replied another voice, older and weary. The blow to his head was severe. The fact that he survived at all is miraculous. As for his memory, only time will tell. Memory. The word echoed strangely in Thomas's mind, as though it belonged to someone else. He tried to grasp at something, anything that might anchor him to himself, but found only emptiness where his past should have been. "Thomas?" The woman's voice was closer now, artificially sweet. "Thomas, can you hear me?" He opened his eyes slowly, squinting against light that seemed too bright. A woman leaned over him, blonde, beautiful, wearing an expression of concern that somehow didn't reach her pale blue eyes. She was a stranger, yet she spoke to him as though they were intimately acquainted. "Who are you?" Thomas asked, his voice rough from disuse. The woman's face crumpled in what appeared to be grief, though Thomas caught something else flickering behind her eyes, something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Oh, my dear brother," she said, reaching for his hand. "I'm Vivian, your sister. Don't you remember me?" Thomas stared at her, searching her face for any spark of recognition. Nothing. She might as well have been a portrait on the wall for all the familiarity she evoked. "I don't remember anything," he admitted, the words feeling like a confession of failure. "The doctor says it's temporary," said another voice, and Thomas turned to see a man approaching the bed. He was perhaps 40, with thinning brown hair and small, calculating eyes. "I'm your cousin, Reginald Greyford. We've been so worried about you." More strangers claiming to be family. Thomas felt a growing sense of unease, though he couldn't say why. These people seemed genuinely concerned for his welfare, yet something about their manner set his teeth on edge. "What happened to me?" Thomas asked. "A carriage accident," Vivian replied quickly. "You were traveling to London on business when your horses spooked. The carriage overturned and you struck your head on a rock. You've been unconscious for nearly a week." Thomas tried to process this information, but it felt like trying to grasp smoke. What kind of business? Reginald and Vivian exchanged a glance that Thomas pretended not to notice. "Estate matters," Reginald said smoothly. "You're the Duke of Greyford, Thomas. You have vast holdings that require constant attention." Duke. The title meant nothing to him, carried no weight of responsibility or recognition. Thomas looked around the room for the first time, taking in the opulent furnishings, the silk wallpaper, the paintings that must have cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. If this was his home, why did it feel so foreign? "I should like to rest," Thomas said, suddenly exhausted by the effort of trying to make sense of his situation. "Of course," Vivian said, her smile bright and cold. "But Thomas, there are some urgent matters that require your attention, papers that need signing, decisions that can't wait." "Surely they can wait until he's recovered," the doctor interjected, and Thomas felt a flash of gratitude toward the older man. "Some things cannot wait," Reginald said firmly. "The estate won't manage itself, and there are creditors who—" "Enough," Thomas said, surprised by the authority in his own voice. "Whatever needs to be done can wait until I understand what's happening to me." After the doctor and his supposed relatives left, Thomas struggled to sit up, his head spinning with the effort. He managed to swing his legs over the side of the bed and stand on shaky legs, making his way to the mirror that hung above the fireplace. The face that looked back at him was a stranger's. Dark hair disheveled from his time in bed, grey eyes that seemed to hold secrets he couldn't access, and a thin scar along his left temple that must have been from the accident. He was perhaps 30, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority, yet he felt like a child lost in a world too large to comprehend. A soft knock at the door interrupted his brooding. "Come in," he called, expecting to see Vivian or Reginald with more urgent business that couldn't wait. Instead, a young woman entered, carrying a tea tray. She was perhaps 25, with rich brown hair pulled back in a simple style and warm brown eyes that seemed to see everything. Her dress was plain but well made, marking her as neither servant nor lady, but something in between. "Your Grace," she said with a small curtsy. "I'm Miss Lucy Carter. I've been hired to assist with your recovery." Thomas found himself studying her face with the same intensity he had applied to the mirror, searching for any hint of recognition. Unlike with his supposed family, he felt no unease in her presence, only a strange sense of calm. "Assist how?" he asked. "I'm a companion, Your Grace. I help with reading, correspondence, daily activities, whatever you might need while you recover your strength." She set the tea tray on a small table near the window. "Lady Grayford thought you might benefit from having someone neutral to help you navigate this difficult time." Neutral. The word struck Thomas as significant, though he wasn't sure why. "You don't know me," he said. It wasn't a question. "No, Your Grace. I was hired only yesterday." Lucy poured tea with steady hands, and Thomas noticed that she didn't seem nervous in his presence the way the servants did. "I hope that might be helpful, actually. Sometimes a fresh perspective can be valuable." Thomas moved to the chair across from her, accepting the cup of tea gratefully. "Tell me, Miss Carter, what do you know about me?" Lucy considered the question carefully. "Very little, I'm afraid. I know you're the Duke of Grayford, that you've suffered a serious injury, and that you're having difficulty with your memory. Beyond that," she shrugged, "I suppose I'll learn about you as we work together. And what do others say about me?" Again, that careful consideration. "I've heard that you're a man of strong opinions and decisive action. Some speak of you with respect, others with wariness." "Wariness. You're a powerful man, Your Grace. Powerful men often inspire complex feelings in others." Thomas found himself appreciating her honesty. Unlike his family, who seemed eager to tell him exactly who he was and what he should think, Lucy offered only observations without judgment. "I don't feel powerful," Thomas admitted. "I feel like a man who's lost everything that mattered." "Perhaps," Lucy said gently, "this is an opportunity to discover what truly matters." Something in her tone made Thomas look at her more closely. There was wisdom in her brown eyes, and a kindness that seemed genuine rather than calculated. "You speak as though you've experience with loss," he observed. "Everyone has experience with loss, Your Grace. The question is what we choose to do with it." Before Thomas could respond, the door burst open and Vivian swept in, her expression sharp with displeasure. "Thomas, there you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." Her gaze fell on Lucy with obvious disapproval. "Miss Carter, I trust you're not tiring His Grace with unnecessary conversation." "Not at all," Thomas said before Lucy could respond. "Miss Carter was just explaining her role here." "Yes, well, her role is quite limited," Vivian said crisply. "Thomas, Reginald needs to speak with you about the estate accounts. There are some discrepancies that require your immediate attention." Thomas felt that familiar unease return. "What sort of discrepancies?" "Nothing serious, I'm sure. Just some confusion about investments and expenditures. You know how these things can be." But Thomas didn't know how these things could be. He didn't know anything about investments or expenditures or the running of a ducal estate. The fact that his sister seemed to expect him to make important financial decisions while his memory was compromised struck him as odd. I think I'd prefer to wait until my head is clearer, Thomas said. Vivian's smile became strained. Thomas, darling, I understand that you're confused, but the estate can't simply stop functioning because of your condition. You have responsibilities. Then perhaps someone else should handle them temporarily. That's not how these things work, Vivian said, her voice taking on a sharp edge. You're the Duke. These decisions must come from you. Thomas glanced at Lucy, who had remained silent during this exchange, but whose expression suggested she found the conversation as troubling as he did. Miss Carter, Thomas said, would you mind staying while my sister and I discuss these matters? I find that having a neutral party present helps me think more clearly. Vivian's eyes flashed with anger. That's hardly appropriate, Thomas. Family business should remain within the family. Miss Carter is here to assist me, Thomas replied, surprised by his own firmness. I consider her presence helpful. For a moment, Vivian looked as though she might argue further. Then her expression smoothed into that practiced smile. Of course, if that's what you prefer, though I do think you'll find that some matters are best discussed privately. As Vivian launched into a complicated explanation of estate finances that made Thomas's head spin, he found himself watching Lucy's face. She listened intently, occasionally making small notes in a leather portfolio, and Thomas noticed that her expression grew increasingly troubled as the conversation progressed. When Vivian finally left, promising to return with Reginald and the necessary papers, Thomas turned to Lucy. What did you think of all that? He asked. Lucy hesitated, clearly weighing her words carefully. I think, Your Grace, that you might benefit from having your own advisor review any documents before you sign them. Someone who works for you alone, rather than for the family estate. It was a diplomatic way of saying that she didn't trust his sister's motives, and Thomas felt a surge of gratitude for her careful honesty. You think they're trying to take advantage of my condition? I think, Lucy said slowly, that you should be very careful about making important decisions while your memory is compromised. And I think you should trust your instincts, even if you can't remember why you have them. Thomas nodded, feeling more clear-headed than he had since awakening. Whatever game his family was playing, he was beginning to suspect that Lucy Carter might be the only person in his life who had no interest in the outcome beyond his own welfare. Miss Carter, he said, I think this recovery is going to be more complicated than anyone anticipated. Yes, Your Grace, Lucy replied, her brown eyes steady and reassuring. But I believe you're stronger than they think you are, and sometimes losing our memory can help us see things more clearly than we ever could before. As Thomas prepared for what he suspected would be a battle for control of his own life, he found himself grateful for the presence of the one person who seemed to see him as a man rather than a title. Lucy Carter might be humble in station, but she possessed something his wealthy, powerful family lacked entirely: integrity. And in the fog of his lost memory, that integrity might be the light that guided him back to himself. Fragments of truth. The next morning brought another visit from Reginald, this time accompanied by a thin, nervous man introduced as the family solicitor. They spread papers across the desk in Thomas's study, speaking in urgent tones about investments that needed immediate attention and contracts that couldn't wait. The mining venture in Wales is particularly time-sensitive, Reginald explained, his finger tracing lines of text that meant nothing to Thomas. If we don't act quickly, we'll lose the opportunity entirely. Thomas studied the documents, but the legal language might as well have been written in a foreign tongue. How much money are we discussing? £50,000, the solicitor said quickly. A significant sum, but one that will yield substantial returns. £50,000. Thomas repeated the figure, trying to grasp its significance. Is that a large portion of the estate's assets? Another of those quick glances between Reginald and the solicitor. Not at all, Reginald assured him. You're quite wealthy, Thomas. This is merely a prudent investment. Something about their eagerness bothered Thomas, but he couldn't put his finger on what. I'd like Miss Carter to review these documents as well. Miss Carter. Reginald's eyebrows rose. Thomas, surely you don't mean to involve a companion in estate business? I mean to involve someone I trust in matters that affect my future, Thomas replied, surprised by his own certainty. When Lucy arrived, she studied the papers with careful attention, occasionally asking questions that made the solicitor shift uncomfortably in his chair. This mining venture, she said finally. What exactly do we know about the company's previous operations? They come highly recommended, Reginald said dismissively. By whom? Lucy persisted. By people in the industry. Lucy made a note in her portfolio. And the geological surveys. Have they been independently verified? The solicitor cleared his throat. Such details are hardly necessary for a man of his Grace's standing. The opportunity speaks for itself. Does it? Lucy asked mildly. Because from what I can see, this contract commits the Duke to substantial payments with very little guarantee of return. The terms seem quite favorable to the mining company, and rather less so to the investor. Thomas watched the exchange with growing interest. Lucy's questions were exposing holes in what had been presented as a straightforward business opportunity. I think I'd like to postpone this decision, Thomas said. Reginald's face flushed. Thomas, you can't simply ignore your responsibilities because a companion raises unfounded concerns. I'm not ignoring anything, Thomas replied calmly. I'm being prudent. Surely that's a quality you'd want in someone managing a large estate? After the men left, clearly frustrated by the delay, Thomas turned to Lucy with genuine curiosity. How did you know to ask those questions? Lucy smiled, the first truly relaxed expression he'd seen from her. My father was a country solicitor, Your Grace. I grew up listening to him review contracts and investments. He always said that when someone rushes you to sign papers, it's usually because they don't want you to read them carefully. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. A shadow crossed Lucy's face. He died 3 years ago, which is how I came to work as a companion. But his lessons have served me well. Thomas found himself wanting to know more about her background, about the circumstances that had brought her to his household. But before he could ask, Vivienne appeared in the doorway. Thomas, I need to speak with you privately, she said, her tone brooking no argument. Lucy rose immediately. I'll be in the library if you need me, Your Grace. Once they were alone, Vivienne's facade of sisterly concern dropped entirely. What exactly do you think you're doing? She demanded. I'm sorry? This ridiculous reliance on a hired companion. Thomas, you're making important decisions based on the opinions of someone who has no understanding of our family's situation. Thomas studied his sister's face, noting the anger she was trying to control. What is our family's situation, Vivienne? We're facing some temporary financial difficulties, she said reluctantly. Nothing serious, but it requires careful management. The mining investment would help stabilize our position. Our position or yours? Vivienne's eyes flashed. What's that supposed to mean? I'm wondering why you and Reginald are so eager for me to make financial commitments while my memory is impaired. It seems convenient. Convenient? Vivienne's voice rose. Thomas, I'm your sister. I'm trying to protect your interests. Are you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you're trying to rush me into decisions that benefit you. Vivienne stared at him for a long moment, and Thomas saw something calculating in her expression. You're not yourself, she said finally. The accident has changed you. The Thomas I know would never question family loyalty like this. Perhaps the Thomas you know wasn't thinking clearly. Or perhaps, Vivienne said coldly, you're allowing a scheming companion to poison your mind against your own family. After Vivienne left, Thomas sat alone in his study, trying to make sense of the conflicting emotions swirling through him. His sister's words had been meant to make him doubt Lucy's motives, but they'd had the opposite effect. Lucy had asked thoughtful questions and raised legitimate concerns. Vivienne had responded with anger and accusations. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in. Lucy entered, carrying a tea tray and wearing an expression of careful neutrality. I thought you might need some refreshment after your conversation. You heard? Lady Grayford has a rather carrying voice when she's upset. Thomas accepted the tea gratefully. She thinks you're manipulating me. And what do you think? Thomas considered the question seriously. I think you're the only person who's asked me what I want, instead of telling me what I should do. Lucy settled into the chair across from him. What do you want, Your Grace? I want to understand who I really am, Thomas said without hesitation. Not who my family says I am, or who they want me to be, but who I actually am. That's a worthy goal, Lucy said softly. How do you think we might achieve it? By learning about my life before the accident, but not from Vivienne or Reginald. They have too much invested in their version of events. I need to speak with people who have no reason to lie to me. Lucy nodded thoughtfully. The servants might be a good place to start. They see everything but have little power to influence your decisions. Would you help me with that? Of course, Your Grace. Though I should warn you, you might not like everything you discover. Thomas met her steady gaze. I'd rather know an uncomfortable truth than live with a comfortable lie. That afternoon, Lucy arranged for Thomas to speak with several long-serving members of his household staff. The conversations were illuminating, though not always in ways he'd expected. From his butler, He learned that he'd been a fair but demanding employer, quick to anger but also quick to forgive. From his housekeeper, he discovered that he'd been generous with his tenants during difficult times, often forgiving rents when crops failed. But it was his valet, a man named Peters who'd served him for over a decade, who provided the most revealing insights. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but you've seemed different since the accident," Peters said carefully. "Different how?" "Calmer, if I may say so. Before you were always rushing about, always angry about something. You had a terrible temper, particularly when it came to your family." "My family?" Peters glanced around nervously. "Perhaps I shouldn't say, Your Grace. Please, I need to understand. You and Lady Grayford argued frequently, sir, and Master Reginald, well, you'd forbidden him from the estate more than once. Said he was bleeding you dry with his schemes and investments." Thomas felt a chill of recognition, though he couldn't say why. "What kind of schemes?" "I couldn't say for certain, Your Grace, but there were always papers to sign, always urgent business that couldn't wait. You used to say that Reginald could find a way to lose money in a gold mine." After Peters left, Thomas sat in stunned silence. The picture emerging of his pre-accident self was troubling. A man at odds with his family, suspicious of their motives, quick to anger. Yet his family was now presenting themselves as his closest allies and advisors. "You look troubled," Lucy observed, entering the study with her usual quiet grace. "I'm beginning to think my accident was very convenient for certain people." Lucy sat down across from him. "What will you do with this information?" "I'm not sure yet, but I'm starting to understand why you suggested I be careful about signing papers." "Your Grace," Lucy said hesitantly, "there's something else you should know. I've been asking discreet questions around the estate, and there are rumors—" "What kind of rumors?" "About your family's financial situation. Some of the servants have heard arguments between Lady Grayford and Master Reginald about debts and creditors. There's talk that they've been living beyond their means, expecting you to cover their expenses." Thomas felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. "So they need me to sign papers and make investments, but they need me compliant and trusting. It would appear so, and my memory loss makes me the perfect mark. Confused enough to be manipulated, but legally competent enough for my signature to be valid." Lucy nodded gravely. "I'm afraid that seems to be the case." Thomas stood and began pacing, energy flowing through him as understanding dawned. "Then we need to be very careful about how we proceed. If they suspect that I'm recovering my memory or my judgment, they might become desperate. What do you propose?" Thomas turned to face her, and Lucy saw something new in his grey eyes, determination and strength that hadn't been there before. "I propose we give them exactly what they think they want, while gathering evidence of what they're really doing. Let them think I'm still confused and dependent on their guidance. That could be dangerous, Your Grace. If they realize you're investigating them, then I'll need someone I can trust absolutely to help me," Thomas said, his gaze steady on hers. "Someone with no agenda beyond the truth." Lucy met his eyes without flinching. "You have that person, Your Grace." As Thomas looked at the woman who'd entered his life as a hired companion and become his only ally, he felt something stirring in his chest. Gratitude, certainly, but something deeper as well. Lucy Carter had helped him begin to remember who he truly was, and in doing so, she'd become more important to him than all the wealth and titles his family was so eager to control. The battle for his identity was just beginning, but with Lucy at his side, Thomas felt ready to face whatever truths lay ahead. The deception unveiled over the following weeks. Thomas played the role of the confused, compliant Duke, while Lucy helped him gather evidence of his family's deception. They worked carefully, never meeting openly for too long, communicating through subtle glances and coded conversations that wouldn't arouse suspicion. Lucy proved invaluable in this covert investigation. Her position as a companion allowed her to move freely through the house, and her gentle manner encouraged servants to confide in her. Piece by piece, they assembled a picture of systematic financial manipulation that had been going on for months before Thomas's accident. "Look at this," Lucy said one evening, spreading papers across the desk in Thomas's private study. They'd taken to meeting there after the household had retired, the only time they could speak freely. "These are copies of investment documents from the past year. Notice anything unusual?" Thomas studied the papers, his understanding of financial matters improving daily as Lucy patiently explained various terms and concepts. "The signatures," he said suddenly. "They don't all look the same." "Exactly. Some of these were clearly signed by you. The handwriting matches samples from before your accident." But others, Lucy pointed to several documents. These signatures are similar, but not identical. I believe someone has been forging your name. Thomas felt a cold anger building in his chest. Reginald, most likely. And look at the dates. Several of these were supposedly signed while you were unconscious after the accident. They've been stealing from me. It appears so, and not just through forged signatures. Look at this ledger I found in Master Reginald's room. Lucy produced another document. It shows payments made to various creditors, all supposedly on your behalf. But when I checked with your legitimate accounts, these payments were never recorded. Thomas studied the evidence, his mind working more clearly than it had since the accident. They've been using my name and credit to pay their own debts, while making it appear that the estate is in financial difficulty, which would justify the urgent need for new investments and asset sales, Lucy added. Investments that would likely benefit them more than you. How much have they stolen? Lucy's expression was grim. Based on what I've been able to document, at least £200,000 over the past 18 months. Possibly more. The sum was staggering. Thomas felt a mixture of rage and betrayal that made his hands shake. My own family. I'm sorry, Your Grace. I know this must be painful. Thomas looked at Lucy, noting the genuine sympathy in her brown eyes. Over the weeks of their investigation, he'd come to rely on her not just for her intelligence and discretion, but for her steady presence and unwavering honesty. She'd become his anchor in a world where everything else seemed built on lies. What would you advise? He asked. We need more evidence before we act, and we need to be prepared for them to deny everything. They'll claim the documents are forgeries, that you're confused because of your injury. Then we need witnesses, people who can testify to what they've seen and heard. Lucy nodded. I've been cultivating relationships with several servants who've been troubled by what they've observed. Peters, your valet, has kept careful records of conversations he's overheard, and Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper, has noticed discrepancies in household accounts. Good. What about legal counsel? I assume the family solicitor is compromised. Almost certainly, but I've made discreet inquiries about independent legal representation. There's a firm in London with an excellent reputation for handling complex estate matters. Thomas marveled at Lucy's thoroughness. You've thought of everything. I've tried to anticipate what you might need, Lucy said simply. This situation is complicated, and you'll need every advantage. Before Thomas could respond, they heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Lucy quickly gathered the papers while Thomas moved to the window, adopting the pose of a man lost in thought. Vivian entered without knocking, her expression sharp with suspicion. Thomas, what are you doing up so late? I couldn't sleep, Thomas replied, not turning from the window. My head still aches sometimes. Perhaps you should ask Dr. Morrison for a stronger sleeping draught. Vivian's gaze fell on Lucy, who was arranging books on a shelf with studied casualness. Miss Carter, surely your duties don't extend to such late hours. His Grace requested some reading material, Lucy replied calmly. I was just organizing his books. How dedicated of you. Vivian's tone suggested she found such dedication suspicious. Thomas, Reginald and I need to discuss the Welsh mining investment tomorrow. The opportunity won't wait much longer. Of course, Thomas said, still not turning around, though I'm still not entirely clear on the details. That's why you have family to advise you, Vivian said, her voice taking on that artificially sweet tone Thomas had learned to distrust. We only want what's best for you. After Vivian left, Thomas and Lucy remained silent for several minutes, ensuring she was truly gone. She's becoming suspicious, Lucy observed quietly. Yes, which means we need to act soon. Thomas turned from the window, his expression resolute. Tomorrow, I want you to send word to that London law firm. It's time to bring in professional help. Are you certain? Once we take that step, there's no going back. Your family will know you're actively working against them. Thomas considered this. They've been working against me for months, possibly years. I think it's time I returned the favor. The next morning brought the confrontation Thomas had been dreading. Reginald arrived early, accompanied by the nervous solicitor and carrying a portfolio of documents that required immediate attention. The mining investment, Thomas, Reginald said without preamble. We've delayed as long as possible, but the opportunity expires today. You must sign these papers. Thomas studied the documents, noting that they were even more complex than the previous versions. These terms seemed different from what we discussed before. Minor adjustments, the solicitor said quickly. Standard modifications to protect your interests. Protect my interests, or someone else's? Thomas asked mildly. Reginald's face flushed. What's that supposed to mean? I'm wondering why every investment you bring me seems to require immediate action. It's almost as though you don't want me to have time to think about them. Thomas, you're being paranoid, Vivian said, entering the study with her usual dramatic timing. The accident has made you suspicious of everyone, even your own family. Has it? Or has it simply cleared my head enough to see what's really happening? The three conspirators exchanged glances that confirmed Thomas's suspicions. They were growing desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. I'm not signing anything today, Thomas announced. In fact, I'm not signing anything until I've had these documents reviewed by independent legal counsel. Independent counsel, Reginald sputtered. Thomas, that's completely unnecessary. We have a perfectly competent solicitor right here, who seems remarkably eager to rush me into decisions without proper review. Thomas stood, using his full height to intimidate. I'm beginning to wonder whose interests he really serves. The solicitor went pale. Your Grace, I assure you, you assure me of nothing. Thomas cut him off. In fact, I'm beginning to question a great many things about my recent business dealings. Vivian stepped forward, her mask of concern slipping to reveal something harder underneath. Thomas, you're not thinking clearly. The accident has affected your judgment. On the contrary, I think I'm seeing more clearly than I have in years. This is ridiculous, Reginald snapped, his composure finally cracking. Thomas, you have obligations. Yes, I do. And my primary obligation is to protect the estate from those who would exploit it for their own gain. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Thomas could see his family realizing that their careful manipulation was unraveling. I think, Thomas said quietly, it's time we had an honest conversation about what's been happening to my finances over the past year. Reginald's face went white. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Facts about forged signatures, unauthorized payments, and investments that seem designed to benefit everyone except me. Vivian and Reginald exchanged a look of pure panic. Their carefully constructed deception was collapsing, and they knew it. You can't prove any of that, Vivian said, but her voice lacked conviction. Can't I? Thomas smiled coldly. We'll see about that. As his family members fled the study in confusion and growing fear, Thomas felt a surge of satisfaction. The battle was far from over, but he'd fired the first shot. Now they would have to decide whether to confess their crimes or double down on their deception. Either way, Thomas was ready for them. And with Lucy's help, he would reclaim not just his memory and his fortune, but his very identity. The humble companion who'd been hired to assist with his recovery had become the key to his salvation. And perhaps, Thomas thought as he watched Lucy enter the study with a satisfied smile, she might become something even more precious than that. The counterstrike. The response to Thomas's confrontation came swiftly and was more vicious than he'd anticipated. Within hours of his refusal to sign the mining documents, Dr. Morrison arrived at Grayford Manor with a grim expression and a leather bag full of medical instruments. I've received some disturbing reports about your condition, Your Grace, the doctor said, settling into a chair across from Thomas in the study. Your family is concerned that your injury may have caused more damage than we initially realized. Thomas felt a chill of apprehension. What sort of damage? Mental instability, paranoid delusions, an inability to make rational decisions. Dr. Morrison's tone was clinical, but Thomas caught something else in his manner, the nervousness of a man who'd been paid to reach a particular conclusion, and who reported these symptoms. Lady Grayford and Master Reginald have both observed concerning changes in your behavior. They're worried that you may not be competent to manage your affairs. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. If Thomas appeared too confused and compliant, his family could manipulate him into signing away his fortune. But if he showed too much clarity and resistance, they could have him declared mentally incompetent and take control of his estate through legal guardianship. I see, Thomas said carefully. And what would you recommend, Doctor? A period of rest and observation, perhaps in a private facility where you could receive proper care. You mean an asylum? Dr. Morrison's discomfort was evident. A private hospital, Your Grace, for your own protection. Thomas realized that Lucy had been right to urge caution. His family wasn't just stealing from him. They were prepared to have him committed to an institution to cover their tracks. I appreciate your concern, Doctor, but I feel quite well. Perhaps a second opinion would be advisable. That won't be necessary, Dr. Morrison said quickly. I've been treating you since the accident. I'm familiar with your case. Nevertheless, I insist. After the doctor left, clearly frustrated by Thomas's refusal to cooperate, Lucy appeared at the study door with her usual perfect timing. "You heard?" Thomas asked. "Enough. They're moving faster than we anticipated." "Which means we need to move faster as well." Thomas stood and began pacing, his mind working furiously. "Have you heard back from the London solicitors?" "Yes, Mr. Blackwood will arrive tomorrow morning. He's bringing a colleague who specializes in cases involving mental competency challenges." "Good. What about the evidence we've gathered?" "I've prepared copies of everything, along with sworn statements from 3 servants who witnessed suspicious activities. Peters has been particularly helpful. He kept detailed records of conversations he overheard." Thomas felt a surge of gratitude for Lucy's foresight. "You've been preparing for this possibility." "I've been preparing for several possibilities," Lucy admitted. "Your family has shown they're willing to go to considerable lengths to maintain control. We needed to be ready for anything, including having me declared insane. Especially that." Lucy's expression was grave. "It's a common tactic when families want to control an inconvenient heir. The victim is isolated, discredited, and ultimately silenced." Thomas studied her face, noting the depth of knowledge behind her words. "You speak as though you've seen this before." Lucy hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "I have, actually. My previous position was with a family where similar circumstances arose, an elderly gentleman whose nephews were eager to inherit. I tried to help him, but—" She shrugged sadly. "I was just a companion. No one listened to me." "What happened to him?" "He died in a private hospital 6 months after being committed. The nephews inherited everything." Thomas felt a cold fury building in his chest. They murdered him. They killed his spirit first. The rest followed naturally. Lucy met his eyes steadily. "I won't let that happen to you." The simple declaration, spoken with quiet conviction, moved Thomas more than any grand gesture could have. This woman, who owed him nothing and had everything to lose by opposing his powerful family, was willing to risk her own safety to protect him. "Why?" he asked. "Why are you willing to fight for me?" Lucy was quiet for a long moment, and Thomas saw something vulnerable in her expression. "Because you're a good man," she said finally. "I've seen you with the servants, with the tenants who come seeking help. You're kind and fair, even when you don't remember why you should be. That's not something that comes from memory, Your Grace. That's who you are at your core." Thomas felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the growing realization that his feelings for Lucy had evolved far beyond professional appreciation. "Lucy," he said softly, using her given name for the first time, "I need you to know that whatever happens, I'm grateful for everything you've done. You've given me back myself." "You were never really lost," Lucy replied. "You just needed someone to help you remember." Their moment of connection was interrupted by urgent knocking at the study door. Peters entered without waiting for permission, his face flushed with alarm. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion, but there are men at the door. They claim to be from a private hospital, and they have papers." "What kind of papers?" Thomas demanded. "Commitment papers, Your Grace, signed by Dr. Morrison and witnessed by Lady Grayford and Master Reginald. They say they've come to escort you to a facility for treatment." Thomas felt the trap closing around him. His family had moved with ruthless efficiency, using his refusal to sign their documents as evidence of mental instability. "How many men?" Lucy asked, her mind already working on solutions. "4, miss. Large men. They have a carriage waiting." Thomas realized that his family had planned this carefully. The men would overpower him if necessary, and any resistance would be taken as further evidence of his unstable condition. "Is there another way out of the house?" Lucy asked Peters. "The servants' stairs lead to the kitchen garden, miss. From there, you could reach the stables without being seen." "Good." Lucy turned to Thomas with calm efficiency. "We need to leave immediately. Once you're in that carriage, it will be nearly impossible to prove your competency." Thomas nodded, understanding that their careful investigation had become a desperate flight. "What about the evidence we've gathered?" "I have copies hidden in my room. I'll retrieve them and meet you at the stables." As they prepared to flee his own home, Thomas felt a mixture of anger and determination. His family had overplayed their hand, moving too quickly in their greed and desperation. But their aggressive tactics had also revealed the true extent of their deception. "Peters," Thomas said, "I want you to know that you'll be rewarded for your loyalty. When this is over, I won't forget who stood by me." "Thank you, Your Grace, but if I may say so, you'd better hurry. I can hear them arguing with Lady Grayford about where to find you." Thomas and Lucy made their way through the servants' passages, moving quickly but quietly toward the back of the house. As they reached the kitchen garden, Thomas could hear raised voices from the front hall, Vivian directing the hospital men in their search. "This way," Lucy whispered, leading him toward the stables where a groom was preparing horses for their escape. As they mounted their horses and rode away from Grayford Manor, Thomas looked back at the house that had been his prison and felt a sense of liberation despite the danger they faced. He was finally free to fight back against those who had betrayed him, and he wasn't fighting alone. Lucy rode beside him, her face set with determination, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She had helped him remember who he truly was, and now she would help him reclaim his life. The battle for his identity had become a battle for his freedom, and Thomas was ready to fight with everything he had. His family had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated both his strength and the loyalty of the humble companion who had become his greatest ally. The Reckoning. The London law offices of Blackwood and Associates occupied an imposing building in Lincoln's Inn, its dark wood paneling and leather-bound law books speaking of tradition and respectability. Thomas sat across from Mr. Blackwood, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s whose reputation for handling complex estate disputes was legendary. "Your case is quite extraordinary, Your Grace," Blackwood said, reviewing the documents Lucy had compiled. "The evidence of financial manipulation is compelling, but the commitment papers present a more immediate problem." "Can they be challenged?" Thomas asked. "Certainly, but it will take time. Meanwhile, your family has legal authority to act on your behalf. They could liquidate assets, transfer properties, even alter your will." Lucy leaned forward from her chair beside Thomas. "What if we could prove that the commitment was obtained through fraud?" Blackwood's eyebrows rose. "How so?" "Dr. Morrison was paid to declare His Grace incompetent," Lucy explained. "We have evidence of payments made to him by Master Reginald, disguised as medical fees but far exceeding any reasonable charges for treatment." "Interesting. Do you have documentation?" Lucy produced a ledger from her portfolio. Master Reginald kept detailed records of his expenses. He never expected anyone to examine them closely. Blackwood studied the entries, his expression growing more interested. "This could indeed constitute fraud. If we can prove the doctor was bribed to provide false testimony about His Grace's mental state, the commitment papers would be invalid," Thomas finished. "Exactly. But we'll need more than financial records. We need witnesses who can testify to your actual mental state." "I can provide those," Lucy said confidently. "Several servants have observed His Grace's behavior since the accident. They can attest that he's been rational, coherent, and increasingly aware of his family's deception." Thomas watched Lucy present their case with professional competence, marveling at her transformation from humble companion to fierce advocate. She had become indispensable to him, not just as an ally, but as a partner in every sense of the word. "There's another matter we should discuss," Blackwood said, his tone becoming more serious. "Your family will likely claim that Miss Carter has been manipulating you, using your vulnerable state to turn you against them. They'll paint her as a fortune hunter who's taken advantage of your condition." Thomas felt a flash of anger. "That's absurd. Lucy has asked for nothing beyond her wages as a companion. Nevertheless, it's a predictable line of attack. We should be prepared for it." Lucy's face had gone pale. "Perhaps I should withdraw from the case. I don't want to give them ammunition to use against His Grace." "Absolutely not," Thomas said firmly. "You're the only person who's been honest with me from the beginning. I won't abandon you to protect myself from their lies." Blackwood observed this exchange with interest. "Your Grace, might I ask about the nature of your relationship with Miss Carter?" Thomas met the lawyer's gaze steadily. "Miss Carter has been my companion, my advisor, and my friend. She's helped me discover the truth about my situation and my family. Beyond that, my feelings for her are my own business. I ask only because personal relationships can complicate legal proceedings. If your family can claim that Miss Carter has undue influence over you, then we'll prove them wrong," Thomas said. "Just as we'll prove that I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions." Over the following days, Blackwood's team worked tirelessly to build their case. They interviewed servants from Grayford Manor, examined financial records, and gathered evidence of the systematic fraud that had been perpetrated against Thomas. Meanwhile, Thomas and Lucy stayed in a discreet hotel, planning their strategy and preparing for the legal battle ahead. It was during these quiet evenings that Thomas finally found the courage to address the feelings that had been growing between them. "Lucy," he said one evening, as they reviewed documents in the hotel's sitting room, "when this is over, I want you to know that you'll always have a place in my household. Not as a companion, but as whatever you choose to be. Lucy looked up from the papers she'd been studying, her brown eyes reflecting the lamplight. What are you saying, Your Grace? I'm saying that somewhere in the process of helping me remember who I am, you've become the most important person in my life. Thomas set aside his own documents and moved to sit beside her. I'm saying that I love you, Lucy Carter, and I hope you might consider staying with me permanently. Lucy's breath caught. Thomas, you can't mean that. I'm a companion, a woman of no fortune or family. You're a duke. I'm a man who nearly lost everything because he forgot what truly mattered, Thomas replied, taking her hands in his. You've shown me that titles and wealth mean nothing without someone to share them with, someone who sees past the surface to the person underneath. Your family will never accept it. Society will be scandalized. Let them be scandalized. I've learned that the opinions of people who would betray their own family for money aren't worth considering. Lucy searched his face, looking for any sign of uncertainty. Are you sure? Once your memory fully returns, you might feel differently about everything that's happened. My memory has returned, Lucy. Not all at once, but gradually, over these past weeks. And what I remember most clearly is how empty my life was before you entered it. Thomas was telling the truth. His memories had been returning in fragments, images of arguments with Vivian, confrontations with Reginald, the growing isolation he'd felt as he realized his family's true nature. But alongside those painful recollections came something new, the memory of falling in love with the woman who'd helped him find himself. I love you too, Lucy whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. I've tried not to, tried to maintain proper boundaries, but love doesn't respect boundaries, Thomas finished, pulling her into his arms. Their kiss was gentle at first, then deeper as months of restrained emotion finally found expression. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. What happens now? Lucy asked. Now we finish what we started. We expose my family's crimes, reclaim my estate, and build a life together. And if they try to use our relationship against us, Thomas smiled, feeling more confident than he had since his accident. Then we'll show them that love based on honesty and respect is stronger than any scheme based on greed and deception. The next morning brought news that would test that conviction. Blackwood arrived at their hotel with a grim expression and a newspaper in his hand. I'm afraid your family has struck back, he said, showing them the headline. Duke's mysterious disappearance sparks concern for his safety. The article, clearly planted by Vivian and Reginald, painted Thomas as a confused and vulnerable man who had been abducted by an unscrupulous companion seeking to exploit his condition. It called for his immediate return to medical care and suggested that his family was considering offering a reward for information about his whereabouts. They're trying to turn public opinion against us, Lucy observed. More than that, Blackwood said grimly, they're laying the groundwork for a more aggressive legal strategy. If they can convince a court that you've been kidnapped and are being held against your will, then they could have me forcibly returned to their custody, Thomas finished. Exactly. We need to move quickly. Thomas stood, his jaw set with determination. Then it's time to stop hiding and start fighting. Schedule a hearing for tomorrow. I want to face my accusers directly. Are you certain? Once we go public, there's no going back. Thomas looked at Lucy, drawing strength from her steady presence. I'm certain. It's time to end this charade and reclaim my life. As they prepared for the legal battle that would determine his future, Thomas felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced since before his accident. His memory had returned, but more importantly, he'd discovered who he truly wanted to be. Not the isolated, angry man his family had described, but someone capable of love and trust and genuine connection. Lucy had helped him remember his past, but she'd also shown him a future worth fighting for. And tomorrow, he would fight for both with everything he had. The trial of truth. The courtroom was packed with spectators, drawn by the scandalous headlines and the rare spectacle of a ducal family's private affairs being aired in public. Thomas sat beside Blackwood at the plaintiff's table, acutely aware of the whispers and stares from the gallery. Across the aisle, Vivian and Reginald huddled with their own legal counsel, their faces masks of righteous indignation. Lucy sat in the front row of the public gallery, her presence a source of strength for Thomas, even though she couldn't sit beside him at the counsel table. The legal proceedings would determine not just his financial future, but whether he would be declared competent to make his own decisions about his life and his heart. Your Honor, Blackwood began his opening statement, This case represents a fundamental question about justice and family loyalty. The defendants would have this court believe that the Duke of Greyford is a confused, incompetent man who requires their protection. The evidence will show that His Grace is, in fact, a victim of systematic fraud perpetrated by the very people who claim to care for him most. The defense counsel, a pompous man named Hartwell, who'd clearly been chosen for his theatrical abilities, painted a very different picture in his opening statement. Your Honor, we have here a tragic case of a noble man whose mind has been poisoned against his own family by a scheming woman who saw opportunity in his vulnerable state. The Duke of Greyford suffered a severe head injury that has left him susceptible to manipulation. Miss Carter, a woman of no standing or fortune, has clearly taken advantage of his condition to turn him against those who love him most. Thomas felt his jaw clench at the attorney's words, but Blackwood had warned him to remain composed regardless of the accusations made. The first witness called was Dr. Morrison, who took the stand with obvious reluctance. Under Blackwood's careful questioning, the doctor's testimony began to unravel almost immediately. Dr. Morrison, you declared His Grace mentally incompetent based on what observations? He showed signs of paranoid delusions, inability to make rational decisions, and hostility toward his family. And these observations were made during how many examinations? Well, one formal examination. One examination lasting how long? Perhaps 20 minutes. 20 minutes, Blackwood repeated, allowing the brevity to sink in with the jury. And during this 20-minute examination, you determined that a man who had been successfully managing a vast estate for over a decade was suddenly incompetent? His family reported concerning behaviors? His family, who stood to benefit financially from his incapacitation? The defense attorney objected, but the damage was done. Blackwood then produced the financial records showing the unusual payments to Dr. Morrison. Doctor, can you explain these payments from Master Reginald Greyford? They appear to be far in excess of normal medical fees. Dr. Morrison's face went pale. Those were consultation fees for ongoing care. Consultation fees totaling £5,000 over 6 months. For a patient you examined once for 20 minutes? The doctor's stammered explanations only made his position worse. By the time Blackwood finished with him, it was clear to everyone in the courtroom that his medical opinion had been purchased. Next came the parade of servants from Greyford Manor. Peters, the valet, testified about the conversations he'd overheard between Vivian and Reginald, their discussions of debts, and their urgent need for Thomas to sign financial documents. Master Reginald said they needed to act quickly while His Grace was still confused, Peters testified. He said once the Duke's head cleared, he'd never agree to their plans. Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper, provided evidence of the forged signatures and unauthorized expenditures. Her testimony was particularly damaging because of her long service to the family and obvious reluctance to speak against them. I've been with the Greyford family for 30 years, she said sadly. I never thought I'd see the day when family members would steal from each other, but it was Lucy's testimony that proved most compelling. She took the stand with quiet dignity, her simple dress and modest demeanor contrasting sharply with the defense's portrayal of her as a scheming adventuress. Miss Carter, Blackwood began, please tell the court about your first meeting with His Grace. Lucy described finding Thomas confused and vulnerable, surrounded by family members eager to make decisions on his behalf. She spoke of his gradual recovery, his growing awareness of the inconsistencies in his family's stories, and his determination to understand the truth about his situation. At any point did you encourage His Grace to distrust his family? Blackwood asked. No, sir. I encouraged him to ask questions and think carefully before making important decisions. I felt that was my duty as someone hired to assist with his recovery. Did you ever suggest that he should change his will or make financial decisions that would benefit you? Never. I have asked for nothing beyond my wages as a companion. The defense attorney's cross-examination was aggressive, clearly designed to paint Lucy as a manipulative fortune hunter. Miss Carter, isn't it true that you've been alone with His Grace for hours at a time, with ample opportunity to influence his thinking? I've assisted His Grace with various tasks, yes, but I've never tried to influence his thinking beyond encouraging him to consider all available information before making decisions. And isn't it convenient that this information consistently portrayed his family in a negative light? Lucy's voice remained steady. The information was factual, sir. If it portrayed his family negatively, that was because their actions were negative. You expect this court to believe that a woman of your modest circumstances had no interest in securing a position with a wealthy duke? I expected to be dismissed once His Grace recovered, Lucy replied calmly. I was hired as a temporary companion, nothing more. Yet here you are, sitting in this courtroom as his— What would you call yourself, Miss Carter? Thomas half rose from his chair, anger flashing in his eyes, but Blackwood restrained him with a firm hand. I would call myself someone who cares about His Grace's welfare, Lucy answered with dignity. When Thomas finally took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the chance to judge for themselves whether the Duke of Greyford was competent or confused. Your Grace, Blackwood began, please tell the court about your recovery following the accident. Thomas spoke clearly and coherently about awakening with no memory, his family's eagerness to have him sign documents, and his growing suspicion that something was wrong. I may have lost my memory temporarily, but I didn't lose my judgment, he said. When people are rushing you to make important decisions without giving you time to understand them, it's usually because they don't want you to understand them. What convinced you that your family was deceiving you? The evidence, forged signatures, unauthorized payments, investments that benefited them more than the estate, and the fact that they tried to have me committed when I started asking questions. The defense attorney's cross-examination focused on Thomas's relationship with Lucy, clearly hoping to suggest that his judgment had been compromised by romantic feelings. Your Grace, isn't it true that you've developed personal feelings for Miss Carter? Yes, Thomas replied without hesitation. I love her. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The defense attorney smiled, thinking he'd scored a point. And these feelings developed while you were in a vulnerable state, recovering from a serious injury. These feelings developed as I came to know a woman of exceptional character and integrity, Thomas replied firmly. Someone who asked for nothing and gave everything to help me recover not just my memory, but my sense of who I truly am. Isn't it possible that these feelings have clouded your judgment about your family? Thomas's voice grew stronger. My feelings for Miss Carter have nothing to do with the evidence of my family's crimes. The forged signatures existed before I met her. The unauthorized payments were made before she entered my household. The only thing Miss Carter did was help me see the truth. The truth according to her interpretation. The truth according to documented evidence, Thomas interrupted. Evidence that any rational person would find compelling. The defense attorney tried several more approaches, but Thomas remained calm and articulate, clearly demonstrating his mental competency. In his closing argument, Blackwood systematically destroyed the defense's case. Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. The defendants systematically defrauded the Duke of Greyford, forged his signature, and when he began to recover and question their actions, they attempted to have him committed to an asylum. They have painted Miss Carter as a manipulator, but the evidence shows she is the only person in this case who acted without self-interest. The defense's closing was a desperate appeal to class prejudice and family loyalty, but it rang hollow in the face of the documented evidence. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. This court finds that the Duke of Greyford is fully competent to manage his own affairs. The evidence of fraud and forgery is compelling and will be referred to the criminal authorities. The commitment papers are hereby declared invalid, obtained through fraudulent means. The courtroom erupted in cheers and gasps. Thomas felt a weight lift from his shoulders as he realized he was finally free from his family's manipulation, free to make his own choices, free to love whom he chose. As the crowd began to disperse, Vivian approached him with tears in her eyes. Thomas, please, we're still family. Thomas looked at his sister with a mixture of sadness and resolve. Family doesn't steal from each other, Vivian. Family doesn't try to have each other committed to asylums. You made your choice when you decided my confusion was an opportunity rather than a tragedy. We needed the money. Then you should have asked for help instead of taking it through fraud. Thomas's voice was firm but not unkind. I would have helped you if you'd been honest. Instead, you chose deception and betrayal. As Vivian and Reginald left the courtroom in defeat, Thomas turned to find Lucy waiting for him. The legal battle was over, but their real life together was just beginning. So, Lucy said with a small smile, what happens now? Thomas took her hands in his, no longer caring who might be watching. Now we go home, together. And your family's debts? Will be paid, but through proper legal channels. They'll face consequences for their crimes, but I won't let them destroy themselves completely. Thomas paused. Despite everything, they are still family. Lucy's smile widened. That's the man I fell in love with. Someone who can be strong without being cruel, who can seek justice without losing compassion. As they left the courtroom hand in hand, Thomas reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. He had lost his memory and nearly lost his fortune, but in the process, he had found something far more valuable, a love based on truth and trust rather than obligation and expectation. The humble companion who had been hired to help him recover had instead helped him discover who he truly wanted to be. And now, with his memory restored and his future secure, Thomas was ready to build a life worthy of the woman who had saved him from more than just his family's deception. She had saved him from a life without love, without trust, without the possibility of genuine connection. And for that gift, he would spend the rest of his life showing her that sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as the simplest blessings. Remembering love, 1 year later, the gardens of Grayford Manor had never looked more beautiful. Thomas stood at the altar that had been erected beneath the ancient oak tree where he had proposed to Lucy 6 months earlier, watching as his bride walked toward him on the arm of Mr. Blackwood, who had graciously agreed to give her away. Lucy was radiant in a gown of ivory silk that had belonged to Thomas's grandmother, the one member of his family whose memory he cherished. Her brown hair was crowned with orange blossoms, and her eyes shone with the happiness of a woman who had found her perfect match. The wedding was small but elegant, attended by friends who had proven their loyalty during the difficult months of legal battles and family estrangement. Peters stood proudly among the guests, having been promoted to estate manager in recognition of his faithful service. Mrs. Whitmore dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, clearly emotional about seeing her master find happiness. Notably absent were Vivienne and Reginald, who were currently residing in considerably reduced circumstances after their criminal convictions. Thomas had ensured they wouldn't face prison, but their days of living off his generosity were over. They would have to make their own way in the world, perhaps learning the value of honest work in the process. "Dearly beloved," the vicar began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Thomas, Duke of Grayford, and Lucy Carter in the bonds of holy matrimony." As Thomas listened to the familiar words, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. The accident that had stolen his memory had ultimately been a gift, stripping away the pretenses and expectations that had kept him from recognizing what truly mattered. "Do you, Thomas, take Lucy to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Thomas said, his voice strong and certain. "With all my heart." "Do you, Lucy, take Thomas to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Lucy replied, tears of joy glistening in her eyes. As they exchanged rings, simple bands of gold that symbolized their commitment to honesty and simplicity, Thomas thought about the life they would build together. Lucy had already proven herself an invaluable partner in managing the estate, her intelligence and compassion making her beloved by tenants and staff alike. More than that, she had helped him become the man he was meant to be, not the cold, isolated duke his family had described, but someone capable of love and trust and genuine connection with others. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Thomas cupped Lucy's face in his hands, marveling at the love he saw reflected in her brown eyes. Their kiss was tender and full of promise, sealing not just their marriage, but their partnership in all things. As the guests cheered and rose petals fell around them like blessings, Thomas whispered in Lucy's ear, "Thank you for helping me remember who I truly am. Thank you for becoming the man I always knew you could be," Lucy whispered back. The wedding breakfast was a joyous affair, filled with laughter and heartfelt toasts. Mr. Blackwood spoke eloquently about the triumph of truth over deception, while Peters offered a touching tribute to the couple's courage in facing adversity together. But it was Lucy's words during her own toast that moved Thomas most deeply. "A year ago, I came to Grayford Manor as a companion hired to help a man recover from an accident," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled guests. "What I found was a man who had lost his memory but not his heart, who had forgotten his past but not his principles. Thomas taught me that sometimes we have to lose everything we think we know about ourselves to discover who we really are." She turned to face her new husband, her eyes shining with love. "You didn't need to remember your past to choose your future. You chose love over obligation, truth over convenience, and hope over fear. You chose to trust a humble companion with no fortune or family, and in doing so, you gave me the greatest gift imaginable, a love based on who we truly are, rather than who the world expects us to be. As the celebration continued into the evening, Thomas and Lucy stole away to the library where their love had first begun to bloom. The room had been transformed since Lucy's arrival, no longer a neglected repository of dusty volumes, but a warm, welcoming space where they spent many happy hours reading together and planning their future. "Any regrets?" Thomas asked as they stood together before the window overlooking the gardens. "Only one," Lucy replied, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "I regret that it took a carriage accident for us to find each other." Thomas laughed, pulling her closer. "Perhaps it was fate. Perhaps I needed to lose my memory to see clearly. Or perhaps," Lucy said softly, "love has a way of finding us when we need it most, even in the most unlikely circumstances." As they stood together in the library where their story had truly begun, Thomas reflected on the lessons he had learned. Memory was precious, but it could also be a prison, trapping us in old patterns and preventing us from growing. Sometimes the greatest gift was the chance to start fresh, to choose who we wanted to be, rather than being bound by who we had been. His family had seen his confusion as an opportunity to exploit him, but Lucy had seen it as a chance to help him become his best self. She had helped him remember not just his past, but his capacity for love, trust, and genuine connection with another person. "I love you, Lucy Grayford," Thomas said, savoring the sound of her new name. "And I love you, Thomas Grayford," Lucy replied. "My husband, my partner, my dearest friend." As they kissed in the golden light of the setting sun, Thomas knew that he had found something more precious than any fortune his family could have stolen. He had found a love that would last a lifetime, built on the strongest foundation of all, absolute trust and unwavering honesty. The Duke who had lost his memory had gained something far more valuable, a future filled with love, purpose, and the joy of sharing his life with someone who saw him not as a title or a fortune, but as a man worthy of love, exactly as he was. Their story had begun with deception and betrayal, but it had become a testament to the transformative power of truth and the courage to trust one's heart. Thomas had learned that sometimes the most humble gifts, like the love of a simple companion, are actually the most precious treasures of all. And in the library, where Lucy had first helped him organize dusty books and forgotten memories, they began to write the first chapter of their new life together, a story that would be filled with all the love, laughter, and happiness that two honest hearts could create when they chose to trust in each other completely. Their love story became a beacon of hope for all who heard it, proof that true love can bloom in the darkest circumstances, that honesty will always triumph over deception, and that sometimes losing everything we think we know about ourselves is the first step toward discovering who we're truly meant to be. The Duke and Duchess of Grayford lived happily ever after, their marriage a testament to the power of love to heal old wounds and create new possibilities. They proved that the most beautiful love stories often